Hello you beautiful misfits, my name is Matt and it's time at last for my final video covering this year's E3, which I'm just as sick of as you probably are by now, so I'm going to blitz through all this as quickly and sarcastically as I can so we can get back to more interesting gaming news topics, like Doom Eternal, or Red Dead Redemption 2, or a now former IGN employee ripping off a YouTuber's review of Dead Cells, resulting in a domino effect of all his previous undetected plagiarism being dragged out into the light and staked out for all the world to see. Plus, I don't want to be here for another 2 months going over the same old ground like I was last year, so to put a final capstone on E3 2018, I now present to you this comparatively short, pithy summary of every other conference that wasn't Microsoft, Nintendo's or Sony's, which would otherwise take me another 3 months to cover if I were to do a single video for each one. So let's get this all wrapped up quickfire style, shall we? Starting with the EA conference hosted this year by Andrea Renee of YouTube channel Kinda Funny and previously of GameStop TV, Yahoo Esports and Game Trailers News, because EA saw Ubisoft's conference last year was more subdued than usual and didn't have Aisha Tyler hosting it, so they figured they could nick some elements to try and make theirs stand out more. It didn't work though, because sports! EA still makes sports games and still devote way too much time to them in their conferences. There'll be new ones out soon, by the way, for all the sports-loving people who buy and enjoy such sports games every sporty year. I'm not dissing sports games fans there, more power to them, but the overwhelming majority of them don't tune into E3. Battlefield 5, now with breakable windows.
You will be able to dive and smash through windows to surprise your enemies.
Yes, they actually touted that as a feature, along with a Battle Royale mode, about which the audience were...
It's...
shall we say split? Meanwhile, Dennis Branval of DICE had drawn the short straw to say, sorry our bosses fucked up the game we worked so hard on, with regards to Star Wars Battlefront 2, although he couldn't say that directly of course.
So we launched our game in November of last year, and clearly we didn't get it quite right.
So he instead talked about Clone Wars stuff coming soon for Swarbat 2, delightful news for anyone who was 8 years old when the prequel trilogy happened and can't get enough of General Goro von Asmodroid here. After that came Command & Conquer Rivals, a Clash of Whatsits knockoff for smartphones wearing the rotted epidermis of the Command & Conquer franchise. If you thought CNC4 was the final nail in the coffin for the series, this is the gibbering mutant that throws said coffin into a freshly dug foundation and pours cement all over it, before going home to fuck its sister.
Command & Conquer for a new generation. New generation.
There were some decent enough moments in this conference, like Vince Zampella of Respawn here, straight up not giving a single fuck, flying or landbound, about the Star Wars game they're ostensibly working on right now. Did he have any gameplay to show us? Nope. A trailer? No siree. Did that seem to at all faze him even a teensy bit? Shit no. Some suit had ordered him to turn up and say stuff to Andrea Renee, and so he did, while also turning his corporate obligation into one big joke that, admittedly, only he seemed to actually get. It was also nice of Martin Selin, the charming yarn man of Sweden, to return and surprise us all with a sequel to Unravel. Called Unravel 2, of course, although the 2 is spelt as TWO and not TOO, a squandered opportunity in my opinion given the sequel has co-op multiplayer, though you can play it solo if you so desire. Speaking of indies, this conference's deeply personal indie project fixture was Sea of Solitude, the trailer for which was visually striking and surreal with the sort of gothy aesthetics that are right up my clove cigarette strewn alleyway. So it's a pity they didn't lead with that. They led instead with lead designer Connie Geppert nervously trying to explain the overall concept of the game in what wasn't her first language, in terms that were a touch too vague and conceptual a lot of the time. Her only visual aid being a solitary boat floating in the background. Which as sales pitches go is like trying to explain the movie Primer in 2 minutes or less using only this picture. Really should have gone with the trailer first. Anthem from BioWare was EA's choice to bring the show to a close, with a unique twist of showing BioWare fans almost nothing of the stuff they actually love BioWare games for. Story and lore? Had some cryptic bullshit Destiny-isms like,
the anthem is all that remains.
With eye-rolling cliches like,
there's a storm coming.
You want memorable characters? Pfft, fine, here's a bloke with no shirt. That's what you BioWare fans want out of your NPCs, right? Now enough of that boring nerd shit. Look at all this combat! Bam, 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 bam. Pew, 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 pew! Oh, and by the way, there's no shagging in this one. Overall, it was your standard EA conference, same basic format, usual corporate pomp and circumstance with some small gems hidden in the mix. Nothing particularly awful, but nothing really to write home about either. Hell, Ubisoft was more entertaining. Because now that Vivendi aren't trying to swallow them whole, they've gone full bore back into their usual mad theatrical nonsense, which means the dancing panda has returned with a renewed vengeance, in your face from the beginning, instead of briefly popping up halfway through, although it was something of a weird relief after their more subdued, sombre and low-key presentation in 2017, which felt like a wake for someone who hadn't actually died yet. Ubisoft kicked things off with a new trailer for Beyond Good and Evil 2, featuring a big dollop of juicy fan service in the form of an appearance by Jade from Beyond Good and Evil 1, a game I've still never played. A wild Joseph Gordon-Levitt then appeared to solicit assets for the new game from fans of the first one. This bit caused a bit of a stir on the old social medias from people who thought it was a tad exploitative, although it was confirmed later that people whose contributions are accepted will get paid real dinero, albeit from a modest budget of $50,000 which Ubisoft have given Jogo Lev for this purpose. So far, the only kind of stuff his company, Hit Record, have solicited for Beyond Good and Evil 2 are things like sound bites for in-game radio stations, which anyone with a decent mic and a copy of Audacity can pump out in a few minutes. It'd be another issue for me entirely if they were soliciting complete texture renders of giant Ganesh statues, entire planets, or anything else that takes an appreciable amount of time. From there, the conference moved on to all things Rainbow Six Siege, specifically esporty things like pro leagues and invitationals, with a brief plug for a documentary that felt a teeny bit self-indulgent, until I remembered Valve did the exact same thing with Dota 2. This was followed by a segment about Trials Rising, the latest instalment of the Trials series that I can't really comment on because I've never played even a single Trials game. Nothing against them, they're just not my cup of tea is all. Although I used to say the same about fighting games once upon a time. After that was The Division 2, this time without the Ubisoft totally authentic honest multiplayer players with their totally authentic multiplayer dialogue that isn't the least bit scripted whatsoever, no siree. Instead, we got a cinematic trailer emphasising the Washington DC setting, its general mood and ambiance, and other pretentious cinematic guff for what is basically a post-collapse survivalist power fantasy. After that came Skull and Bones from Ubisoft Singapore, now looking a teeny bit more Sid Meier's piracy with the addition of land-based gameplay, although the emphasis is still on player versus player naval battles, with no obvious indication players can choose a quiet life trading rum and tobacco between Port Royal and St Kitts. The golden age of piracy wasn't all shivering timbers and spliced main braces after all. Someone had to make the money first for the pirates to then come along and nick it. The game does have very nice looking water effects though. Elijah Wood of Hobbiton and That Farmhouse outside Basin City then appeared to show us something more of transference. Not much admittedly, and it's still very unclear what it actually is besides a VR game. Is it all FMV or something more like Soma? Is it a mix of the two? Are these things ghosts? Whatever the story behind it all, it still has my attention and interest to an extent, because it being a VR only title means I'll likely never ever get to actually play it. After that was more Starlink Battle for Atlas, looking as pretty as ever but still requiring the purchase of physical toys to play, unless you buy the components digitally, which you can do, although that somewhat defeats the purpose of a Toys to Life game, doesn't it? Anyway, Fox MacLeod's in it now, albeit only on the Switch version of course, but what better excuse to get old Shigsy Miyamoto back for another guest appearance? He didn't kill anyone this time. He just got given a toy spaceship instead. For Honor was next, with a spiffy trailer for a new expansion that adds a dynastic China-esque faction to the existing Knights, Vikings and Samurai three-way. No Jason Bloodreaver Vandenberg presenting it this time either, as he departed Ubisoft not long after For Honor's initial release. Which is a shame, because his presentations always made me want to storm a castle, burn it to the ground and then quaff the blood of its occupants from the skull of their conquered lord. After that came The Crew 2, which was all cars and bikes and boats. To be perfectly honest, I went for a toilet break during this bit. I returned in plenty of time to catch the official reveal for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which had been leaked a week or so earlier by an errant keychain. No Bayek of Siwa in this one, however, as it's set in ancient Greece during the Peloponnesian War, 200 years before Assassin's Creed Origins. Instead, you're playing an exiled male or female Spartan warrior, you get to choose, running around as a mercenary doing odd jobs for the Spartans or the Athenians, in the kind of lovely environments we saw in Origins, except with far fewer pyramids obviously, although you now get moral choices and dialogue options with some unspecified influence on segments of the plot. You also get to shag people if you so choose to, which goes to show even Ubisoft knows more about what appeals to BioWare fans than BioWare themselves do nowadays. All in all, this conference was a surprisingly pleasant return to Ubisoft's more cheerful, happy-go-lucky sensibilities, after their weirdly doom-laden E3 2017 presentation, even if that meant enduring a rejuvenated, unrepentant dancing panda, although that still wasn't quite as strange as the reactions some members of the audience had to Andrew WK at the Bethesda conference. Which began with the now seemingly mandatory behind the scenes people who work at Bethesda montage, focusing this year on people like the kitchen staff and other regular non-developer types. Good, honest, hard-working folk who keep the people that built the fantasy world you love from devolving into filthy starving cannibals. Speaking of, Rage 2 was the first actual game on display, and also where the aforementioned Andrew WK appeared to bamboozle the audience. Look at these gormless Burks, being all stupefied. Do they not understand that Rage 2 is Andrew WK, and Andrew WK is Rage 2? At least that was the thought running laps around my head at ridiculous o'clock in the morning UK time when I was watching this live. Proceedings then settled into more familiar and safe ground with this extended gameplay trailer, which recapped the backstory of the first Rage and was something of a stark contrast to the happy neon jaunty Mad Max on ecstasy tone of every other bit of promotional media we'd seen for Rage 2 thus far. Anyway, cue lots of shooty bangs and driving with some obvious Doom 2016 style clear the room of baddies before you can proceed mechanics going on. There was some story stuff about getting an eco pod with a bunch of nanowatts in it, but I wasn't paying too much attention to that because the main character can fling this cool looking glaive weapon like the one in the movie Krull. Moving on, the digital card game Elder Scrolls Legends was confirmed to still be very much a thing. Even more a thing actually, since Bethesda will be relaunching it with overhauled visuals for its upcoming debuts on the Xbox One, PS4 and Switch, bringing the total number of platforms I'll never play it on to 4. There then came this bit about Elder Scrolls Online's Somerset Isles expansion, which adds the proverbial island full of dickhead high elves for you to murder for loot and experience. Then pow! Fucking Doom! More Doom to be exact, going by the name of Doom Eternal, a full-fledged sequel to 2016's Doom. Alas, Bethesda gave us only a teaser of Hell on Earth here because they were saving the more meaty stuff for QuakeCon, which has literally just happened, because I'm slow at E3 videos, and where they did indeed show off more of Doom Eternal. And it looks fucking awesome. Anyway, back to the Bethesda conference. After the bit about Doom came a bit about Quake, which was only fitting really. Specifically Quake Champions, which is still in early access, still character based with special abilities, and still doesn't really set my world alight. Then came the Moon Crash DLC for Prey, which got released at the exact same time it was officially announced here, so people still would have played it well before I covered it in any sort of video like this one. In fact, it's one of the reasons this video is as late as it is, since it's really, really bloody good. I was sceptical an immersive sim like Prey could be squeezed into a roguelite type of experience, but by God, Arcane actually pulled it off. It's fun, genuinely challenging, great for brief sessions, and eminently replayable. So long as you don't complete the final mission objective, because once you do, it creates a save just after the point of no return and locks you into the ending forevermore. Meaning if you want to keep running through the Pythias moonbase until you literally know it like the back of your hand, you have to start a brand new save file. Aside from that little gripe, however, it's bloody brilliant and practically mandatory for the 7 other people besides me that bought and loved Prey. After a brief plug for Wolfenstein 2 for the Switch, there was also a new installment announced called Wolfenstein Youngblood, a co-op shooter in which you and a chum play as BJ Blazkowicz's twin daughters, Jess and Soph, looking for their dad in Nazi-occupied Paris 19 years after the end of Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus. So much for the revolution, but then at least Jess and Soph get to continue the fine Blazkowicz family tradition of killing Nazis. After a brief interlude where Pete Hines talked about VR, it was time for none other than Todd fucking Howard to reminisce about E3's past and his 25 years at Bethesda, before revealing more about Fallout 76. Which is multiplayer Fallout, of course, set in an area of West Virginia, 4 times the size of Fallout 4, 20 years after the bombs fell, where you reportedly meet lots of robots, very few other vault dwellers, and new monsters based on West Virginia folklore. Huh. I didn't know Stalker Call of Pripyat was part of West Virginia's rich storytelling tradition. According to Todd,
of course you can play this solo, alright?
And you'll never see a server list when you play. But, and here's the kicker, you will always be online. Only in a world with a dozen or so players rather than hundreds like a typical MMO. But they'll still be out there, and PvP is definitely a thing. So I hope you're all ready to be sniped in the head from 10 in-game miles away by Pussy Smasher 2006. Assuming you don't get nuked first, because they're a thing you can use too. You have to scavenge the launch codes from slain enemies, but once you do, you can target any point on the map for fiery nuclear annihilation. Base building was also confirmed to be in the game, although I don't see why anyone should even bother with it. Not if Cuckstomper 14 is going to nuke it the first chance he gets. Todd then shepherded proceedings away from Fallout towards the direction of Elder Scrolls, with a version of Skyrim for mobile phones nah, I'm only kidding. It was a mobile exclusive pure Elder Scrolls game, but it's called The Elder Scrolls Blades, and looks a bit like Oblivion if you gave it a quasi-grid-based movement system and touch-swipe combat mechanics. Todd then teased a new proper Elder Scrolls installment, only to bring up Starfield, which he called Bethesda's first wholly original franchise in 25 years. He then immediately cued a trailer that featured a planet, a sunrise, a space station, a big flash, and precisely bugger all else of any note. A somewhat anticlimactic end to the proceedings, truth be told. Good thing Todd had a trailer for the Elder Scrolls 6 up his sleeve then, wasn't it? No subtitle like Oblivion or Skyrim yet, just Elder Scrolls 6, and hints that it might be set in Hammerfell. But that's all Bethesda had to do, wasn't it? Hell, Todd could have gone up to a random member of the audience, whispered Elder Scrolls 6 into their ear and leave with nary another word, and the internet still would have exploded from all the hype. Don't expect it anytime soon though. Todd said it won't be coming until after they've done Starfield, and he called Starfield a next-gen game. So it was probably for the best that Pete Hines immediately brought the show to a close before the crowd put two and two together and tore him and Todd limb from limb in a bacchanalian frenzy. Snarky comments aside, this was a memorable and entertaining Bethesda showcase that was a squillion miles ahead of last year's, which almost felt like the waste of a venue due to the seeming lack of games they showed. Probably because they were saving them all for this one. Whatever the case, good job Bethesda. Similar praise goes to Devolver Digital, whose second spoofy non-conference in as many years was, and I'm genuinely pleased to say this, leaps and bounds over their first one. The writing was sharper, the format more refined, and the jokes overall more on point and generally funnier. Humour is always subjective of course, but I much preferred this non-conference to their first one. Although I did feel a teensy bit personally attacked during this bit.
I read on the internet this one time that some of you had some proper shit to say about our press conference last year.
Look, all I said was playing it a bit straighter would help draw out the comedy some more. And it did. You're welcome. It also helps that much like last year, Devolver allows the games they were showing off, such as my friend Pedro here, to mostly speak for themselves. The crowning moment of awesome for me personally, however, was their announcement of Metal Wolf Chaos XD.
This one will really get the blood flowing to your nethers.
An HD remaster of 2004's Metal Wolf Chaos, a game so unabashedly, proudly, patriotically American, it could only have been made in Japan. By From Software no less. Yes, that From Software of Dark Souls and Bloodborne fame. They didn't always make very dark fantasy / Victorian Gothic games about the pointlessness of human existence in a universe that barely knows its own name, let alone cares what mewling simian flesh sacks inhabit it. They also made games about cool giant robots blowing shit up. But I digress. Metal Wolf Chaos XD features the usual upgraded visuals, sharper textures and widescreen resolutions, but also most importantly of all, the original voice track. Because you can't have Metal Wolf Chaos without such classic lines as Michael! Or
I can't turn my back on a friend. And the reason is, I'm the President of the United States.
Or
time for my afternoon tea. Nothing like sipping some delicious Darjeeling tea. And watching you getting your clock cleaned.
replacing any of this glorious nonsense in any way would be like, ooh. Replacing Silent Hill 2's naturalistic yet also somewhat awkward voice acting with entirely new lines by completely different actors, even though in the original it was a deliberate choice by the development team to help convey the fact that Silent Hill itself is an uncanny location where the usual rules, be they of real life or fiction, no longer apply. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Anyway, Devolver's 2018 Parody Conference wins the title of Best Conference that wasn't Sony, Microsoft or Nintendo, narrowly beating out Bethesda. As much as I'm chuffed for Doom Eternal and more Wolfenstein, neither of those games are quite as uniquely bonkers as Metal Wolf Chaos. Devolver's conference was also a major improvement over their first one, which lots of other people really loved but generally left me feeling a bit cold. Bethesda's 2018 presentation was certainly better than their 2017 one, but it was more of a return to prior form than an improvement like Devolver's 2018 efforts. So well done Devolver! Or rather, well done Imagos Films, since they're the people who actually made it. And that's all of the remaining E3 conferences summarised and... Wait, hang on, I think I'm forgetting one. EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, Devolver Digital... Oh yeah, Square Enix technically had one, didn't they? God, I've always completely forgotten about that one. Shit, I suppose I better watch it. Well, that's 29 minutes and 51 seconds of my life I'm never ever getting back. Do you like video game trailers? Do you also like actor Keith David, whose unmistakable voice has been in lots and lots of my favourite things like The Thing? If your answer to both those questions is an affirmative one, you might be as surprised as I was to discover combining the two doesn't guarantee something greater than the sum of its parts. I could go through all the games shown here, some of which like Dragon Quest XI and Babylon's Fall weren't shown at any other conferences. But frankly, I refuse to put more effort into covering this presentation than Square Enix themselves put into making it. So here's Square Enix's official YouTube channel. And here are some audiobooks narrated by Keith David. Go nuts! You'll have more fun mashing those together than I did watching the E3 2018 Square Enix presentation. It wasn't necessarily bad or awful, it just felt half-arsed. I probably would have enjoyed the PC gaming presentation more, but I've sworn off ever covering that since the first one was so utterly boring. So with that, I limp and hobble over the finish line of another year of E3 coverage. Thank you all for your patience and sticking with me during this time, and who knows, maybe next year I can actually get it all done and dusted in the same month E3 actually happens. In the meantime, normal Pixel Burn service will resume shortly with what will be my 100th episode. Not counting specials or E3 coverage videos like this one. But until then, I'm gonna go have a lie down. You can go now.